Chapter 30 Art. At this place of his tales, Beelzebub became silent, and turning suddenly to his old servant Ahun, who was also sitting there listening to him with the same attention as his grandson Hussein, he said, "And you, old man, are you also listening to me with the same interest as our Hussein? Weren't you yourself personally with me everywhere on that planet Earth, and didn't you see with your own eyes and sense for yourself everything about what I am relating to Hussein? Instead of just sitting there open-mouthed at my tales, you also tell our favorite something. There is no getting out of it. We have got to tell him all we can about those strange three-brained beings, seeing that they have so intensely interested him. Surely you must have been interested in one aspect or another of these queer ducks. Well, tell us something just about that aspect." When Beelzebub had finished speaking, Ahun, having thought a while, replied, "After your subtly psychological tales about all these unintelligibles, how can I intrude with my tales?" And then, with an unusual seriousness, and preserving the style and even entire expressions of Beelzebub himself, he continued, "It is, of course, how shall I put it, my essence even was often thrown out of balance by those strange three-brained beings, who, with their virtuoso caperings, nearly always used to supply an impetus for evoking the being impulse of amazement in one or in another of my spiritualized parts." And then, addressing Hussein, he said, "All right, dear Hussein. I will not, like his right reverence, relate to you in detail about any particular oddity of the psyche of those three-brained beings of our great universe who have taken your fancy. No, I will only remind his right reverence of one factor, the cause of which arose during our 5th day on the surface of that planet, and which, when we were there for the 6th and last time, had become the chief cause why, in every one of those favorites of yours, from the very first day of their arising until their formation as responsible beings, their ableness of normal being mentation is step by step distorted, and finally transformed almost into a cultusara." Thereupon, addressing Beelzebub himself, he, with a timid look and in a hesitant tone, continued to speak. "Don't blame me, your right reverence, for venturing to express to you the opinion which has just arisen in me, and which is the outcome of my reflections on data already perhaps worn too thin for mind conclusions. While relating to our dear Hussein about all the various reasons that have brought it about that the psyche of the contemporary three-brained beings of the planet Earth who have taken his fancy has become transformed, as you once deigned to express yourself, into a mill for grinding out nonsense, you scarcely even mentioned one factor, perhaps more important than the others, which during recent centuries has served as the basis for it. I intend to speak about that factor which has already become definitely maleficent for the contemporary beings, and at the arising of the cause of which you yourself were present, as I very well remember during our stay then in Babylon. I mean the factor they themselves call art. If you should consent in your wisdom to take up that question in detail, then, according to my understanding, our dear Hussein will have perhaps the choicest material for his better elucidation of all the abnormal strangenesses of the psyche of the three-brained beings who in most recent times arise on that planet Earth which has interested him." Having said this, and having with the tip of his tail wiped off the drops of sweat which had formed on his forehead, Ahun became silent and adopted his usual attentive posture. With an affectionate glance, Beelzebub looked at him and said, "Thank you, old man, for reminding me of this. It is true that I have scarcely even mentioned that indeed harmful factor, created also by them themselves, for the final atrophy even of those data for their being mentation which by chance have still survived. All the same, old man, though it's true that I have not so far once referred to it, that does not mean that I have not considered it at all. Having still a good deal of time before us during the period of our travelling, I should in all probability, in the course of my subsequent tales to our common favourite Hussein, have remembered in its time about that of which you have reminded me. However, perhaps it will be very opportune to speak just now about this contemporary terrestrial art because, as you said, during our 5th stay there in person, I was really a witness of the events which gave rise to the causes of this contemporary evil there, and which arose, thanks as always, to the same learned beings there who assembled in the city of Babylon from almost the whole of the surface of that ill-fated planet. Having said this, Beelzebub then turned to Hussein and spoke as follows. This same already definite idea there, now existing there under the denomination art, is, at the present time for those unhappy favorites of yours, one of those automatically acting data, the totality of which of itself gradually, and though almost imperceptibly, yet very surely, converts them. That is, beings having in their presences every possibility for becoming particles of a part of divinity, merely into what is called living flesh. For an all-round enlightenment of the question about the famous contemporary terrestrial art, and for your clear understanding of how it all came about, you must first know about 2 facts that occurred in that same city, Babylon, during our 5th flight in person onto the surface of that planet of yours. The first is how and why I then came to be a witness of the events which were the basis of the reasons for the existence among the contemporary 3-brained beings of the planet Earth, of that now definitely maleficent notion called art. And the second is which were the antecedent events that in their turn then served as the origin of the arisings of these reasons. Concerning the first, I must say that during our stay then in the city of Babylon, after the events I have already related which occurred among always the same learned terrestrial 3-brained beings assembled there from almost the whole planet, that is to say, after they had split into several independent groups and were, as I have already told you, already absorbed in a question what is called politics, and as I intended at that time to leave Babylon, and to continue my observations among the beings of the then already powerful community called Hellas, I decided without delay to learn their speech. From then on I chose to visit those places in the city of Babylon and meet those beings there, which would be of most use in my practical study of their speech. Once when I was walking in a certain street of the city of Babylon, not far from our house, I saw on a large building which I had already many times passed, what is called an ukazimotra, or as it is now called on the earth, a signboard, which had been just put up, and which announced that a club for foreign learned beings, the adherents of legomenism, had been newly opened in that building. Over the door hung a notice to the effect that the enrollment of members of the club was still going on, and that all reports and scientific discussions would be conducted only in the local and Hellenic languages. This interested me very much, and I thought at once whether it would not be possible for me to make use of this newly opened club for my practice in the Hellenic speech. I then inquired of certain beings who were going in or coming out of that building about the details concerning the club, and when, thanks to the explanation of one learned being with whom, as I chanced to find out, I was already acquainted, I had made it all more or less clear to myself, I then and there decided to become also a member of that club. Without thinking long about it, I entered the building, and passing myself as a foreign learned being, I requested, as an adherent of legomenism, to be enrolled as a member of the club. I managed to do this very easily, owing to that old acquaintance whom I had met by chance and who, like the others, took me for a learned being like himself. Well then, my boy, having thus become what is called a full member of that club, I used afterwards to go there regularly and to talk there chiefly with those learned members who were familiar with the Hellenic speech which I needed. As regards the second fact, this proceeded from the following Babylonian events. It must be remarked that among the learned beings of the planet Earth who were then in Babylon, and who were gathered there partly by coercion from almost the whole of the planet by the mentioned Persian king, and partly voluntarily on account of the already mentioned famous question of the soul, there were several among the beings brought there by coercion who were not, like the majority, learned beings of new formation, but who, with a sincerity proceeding from their separate spiritualized parts, strove for high knowledge only with the aim of self-perfection. Owing to their genuine and sincere striving, to the corresponding manner of their existence and to their being acts, these several terrestrial beings had already, even before their arrival in Babylon, been considered initiates of the first degree by those terrestrial three-brained beings worthy to become what are called all the rights-possessing initiates according to the renewed rules of the most saintly Ashata Shimash. And thus, my boy, when I began going to the said club, it became quite clear to me, both from the conversations with them and from other data, that these several terrestrial learned beings who sincerely strove to perfect their reason had from the beginning kept to themselves in the city of Babylon, and never mixed in any of those affairs with which the general mass of these Babylonian learned beings there of that time very soon became involved. These several learned beings kept themselves apart there, not only in the beginning, when all the other learned beings who were then in the city of Babylon first opened a central place for their meetings in the very heart of the city, and when, for their better mutual support, both materially and morally, they founded there a central club for all the learned beings of the earth, but also later on, when the whole body of learned beings was divided into 3 separate sections, and each section had its independent club in one or another part of the city of Babylon. They identified themselves with none of the said 3 sections. They existed in the suburbs of the city of Babylon and scarcely met any of the learned beings from the general mass. And it was only several days before my admittance among them as a member of this club that they for the first time united for the purpose of organizing the club of the adherents of legomenism. These learned beings about whom I am speaking had all without exception been taken to the city of Babylon by coercion, and they were for the most part those learned beings who had been taken there by the Persian king from Egypt. As I later learned, this uniting of theirs had been brought about by 2 learned beings who were initiates of the first degree. One of these 2 initiated learned beings of the earth, who had his arising among, as they are called, the Moors, was named Kanil el Norkel. The other learned initiated being was named Pythagoras, and he arose from among, as they are called, the Hellenes, those Hellenes who were afterwards called Greeks.